Archives Week 2021. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speakers and to moderate this session, which is titled Archives and Research. The intention behind this session was to look at the intersection between research and archiving. So one aspect of the session will look at how archives inform research, whether it's historical, anthropological, or ethnographic research. The other aspect will be looking at how researchers encounter unexplored collections and the process that goes into documenting those collections and archiving them for the wider scholarly community and the wider public as well. We have with us three wonderful speakers. Each speaker will talk for 10 minutes. I will introduce them before they speak. This will be followed by a 30-minute Q&A. So our first speaker is Abhishek Bhattacharyya. He is a PhD candidate in the departments of anthropology and South Asian languages and civilizations at the University of Chicago. His dissertation on late 20th century trajectories of the left in South Asia combines ethnographic and archival research with literary analyses. So today he's going to share his work at digitizing collections that he has come across through the course of his research, including, I don't know if he's going to talk about this, but my excitement occurred when he was digitizing a magazine called Naluppu, which documented the Dalit movement in Telugu-speaking regions of India. So Abhishek, over to you.
Thank you, Priyanka. I will speak about it. And thank you everyone for coming. I'll just start the screen share and hopefully all. Okay. Is it viewed? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's visible.
Sorry. So I'll in this slide just help you have a visual of the kinds of documents I'm looking at and also some context for them. And Priyanka kindly offered to share the links to the actual archives. But I'll just share more by way of stories about how these things came about. So primarily, I think in terms of my research interest, I'm interested in, broadly speaking, the study of social and political movements. And I work on from the late 60s to the early 90s in a number of South Asian contexts. So one is on the side from West Bengal into Nepal, and then Uttar Pradesh, and then what used to be Andhra Pradesh at that point. So that's currently Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. So I'm kind of doing multi-sited ethnography across a range of places. And one of the things pertaining to archives that I came about in the course of my work was that there were newspapers or documents or journals that were being spoken about by many of my interlocutors, or that have, or I'm finding articles on them. But the actual documents themselves are not that easily available. So for example, the first thing that I just to give one example is that Deshobrati is one of the things that I was part of digitizing. Now, Deshobrati, anyone from these contexts, whether from Bengal left politics or from ML politics backgrounds, would probably have heard of it. It's kind of, it became the mouthpiece of the original CPI-ML Bengal unit after the Naxalbari uprising. And however, it was never, I mean, it wasn't even available in a library anywhere, not Calcutta or anywhere. So partly this is a difficulty of, at that point, of course, there was a lot of persecution, and then people had to hide or burn their copies, or they were passing on the copies so that others could read. And so the way I came across this was itself interesting. So Kanchal Kumar, who was then with the party and used to stay in Banaras, he would receive a number of copies to circulate over there. He kept a set for himself. However, that was later on seized by the police in raids. The picked it up, across to come across him, and these copies were just lying under his bed, maintained well, but just lying like that. And so I was trying to take photos of these things, and so at some point my supervisors advised that I can work with the Chicago Library and get digitization grants for all of this to get digitized. So Roja Muthaiya Research Library kind of came around and did this. But today, primarily, I wanted to speak about Naluppu. I mean, overall, I think I've worked with digitizing about 200, 250 titles, which are not recorded in WorldCat, and 4 journals or weeklies, the whole print runs from in Telugu, Bangla, and Hindi contexts. And so coming around to Naluppu, which I wanted to focus on, just this magazine was really born after the massacre, Dalit massacre in Karamchedu in 1985, and there was this huge upsurge politically of Dalit organizing in the Telugu-speaking regions, but also quite a novel thing to happen in a broader Indian context. So Bhattacharyya was a lawyer, and he was one of the 2 co-founders of the Dalit Mahasabha and part of leading this struggle. And it's from this struggle that the idea came about for starting a magazine. So this is Bhattacharyya speaking. I won't actually read out the full quote, but this is Tarakam speaking about how a group of people came around. And from 1985, they were thinking of these questions. But it was only by 1989 that they managed to have the time to get down and come up with this. And this involved a lot of very prominent people like K. Balagopal, Akhileshwari, and others. And to people outside the region, Kancha Ilaya, because he writes more in English, also would be a very prominent person. Kancha Ilaya actually also speaks about his experience at length. And this one I'll read out a little bit. It says, Karamchedu brought about a major change in the lives and thoughts of people like us. At that time, we were all working with Marxist-Leninist groups. We were organizing discussions about the fundamental nature of the caste problem. There was an ongoing difference among us there. Caste thinking of inspired towards blackness. This is why when the idea of a magazine was put forth, we decided that its name should be Naluppu, which means blackness in Telugu. Discussing the caste system through an angle that made sense to us at that time was one thing. We began writing to powerfully record the exploitation and violence that was happening, record an argument that is theoretical, and to take Phule's and Ambedkar's writings, combining Marxist theory with the Dalit question in a way that takes these arguments not just to people organizing the movements, but to a wider public. At that time, except for 1 or 2 books written by Dr. Vijay Bharati, there were no writings about him in Telugu. After this magazine that widely introduced Phule's writings, after this, that is after Vijay Bharati's work, the magazine that widely introduced Phule's writing in Telugu was Naluppu. So Kanjale also speaks about how it is only after Naluppu shut down in a way that he started writing more in English. And this process of digitizing large, primarily thanks to Geeta Ramaswamy of Hyderabad Book Trust. She's been running Hyderabad Book Trust for a long period of time. And I was talking with her and talking with Bhattacharyya and others who were part of Naluppu, but I wasn't being able to see copies. And then finally, Geeta Ramaswamy found the whole set in the Hyderabad Book Trust go down. And again, so I was sitting and taking photos, but then thankfully the grant came through, and then the whole thing was digitized by Hyderabad Book Trust themselves. And so now this also is available online for free. So this is just a couple of images to give you a sense of what the see the so I answer any questions that come up. Yeah.
I was wondering if
yes.
Switch off.
Can
you switch off your video just so maybe the connection might improve.
Oh, you're having trouble here. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying that I'll stop there, and I share the slides so you have a sense of the material that I'm looking at or working with. And But broadly, to just come back to the point that these are all material that I was hearing about for a long time, but the material itself was not accessible in libraries. So which is how the whole digitization process came around. And again, in the previous panel also, there was a lot of discussion about the difficulty of finding access to all this material.
Great, perfect. Okay, thank you so much. Our next speaker is Dr. Zoé Headley, who is a social anthropologist and co-director of the Center for South Asian Studies in Paris. Her work is focused on social practices, caste, and legal anthropology. She has led major digitization projects, including the Digital Archive of Tamil Agrarian History and studies in Tamil studio archives and society. And I welcome her to share her exciting work with us. Over to you, Zoe.
Thank you so much, Priyanka. I will try to share my screen. Tell me if it works, and I'll switch off my camera.
Yeah, I think that would be better.
Because on my side, the connection is okay. And camera off. How do I switch off my camera now? Okay. Again, thank you very much. So in this short presentation of Data Age, or Digital Archive of Tamil Agrarian History, I'll try to give a brief biography of the making of a digital archive created ex nihilo from households in the rural stretches of Tamil Nadu. It would sound really good in the context of this conference if I were to proudly explain to you that as a young anthropologist, while I was doing my PhD, I had a dream of being an anthropologist among historians, a dream of piecing together a subaltern archive in the Madras presidency, which will reveal the voices, lives, and struggles of villagers, an archive free of the interpenetration of knowledge and power reflected in colonial record keeping, as the documents we digitized were largely produced by, for, and within the villages. However, that would be overdoing it, and the inception of Data Age project is much more prosaic. Aha, change the slide. How do I change the slide? Oops. Sorry, I'm not super familiar with Zoom. Okay, it's a nice slide. We can stay on that one, but let me escape. Okay, gosh, help Priyanka, how do...
Zoe, maybe you just want to stop your screen share for a bit and then start screen share again.
Okay, I put it on pause.
Or you can stop altogether and maybe start screen. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, it's okay. Not so pretty, but just so I can keep control, I'll leave it like that, yeah?
Sure, that sounds good.
Okay, great. So indeed, in 2005, I was finishing off my PhD fieldwork amongst the Pramalai Kalar subcaste in the Madurai district of Tamil Nadu. And I decided to pay a visit to the traditional headman, Tavamani Teva, who you can see in the picture wearing a red cloth, to make a few snapshots of a copper plate in his possession for the mere purpose of illustrating my PhD, which I was about to start to write up. I knew of the copper plate, which you can see in the image, in his possession, through Louis Dumont's monograph, who had visited the headman's father in the late 1940s. Beside the copper plate, he had several other historical artifacts, that is, namely royal gifts from the mid-17th centuries. These items were kept in the wooden box you can see here at a room at the back of his house. The box also contained bundled up papers and notebooks, as well as a number of damaged palm leaves. When I asked about them, though I wasn't terribly interested in them at the time, the headman answered that they were just old documents, having belonged either to his great whatever grandfather, and he wasn't too sure what they were about. With the help of V. Krishnasamy, with whom I was doing my fieldwork at the time, that very day we started to examine them, and it appeared that they were a miscellaneous set of documents dealing broadly with conflicts of all sorts: theft, divorce, rape, murders, adultery, etc. They appeared to contain a wealth of information on the nature of disputes brought to the headman's forefathers, the judgments passed by the local panchayats, as well as commentaries on the social or political consequences of different fines and punishments within the Phamalai Kala subcaste. These documents, as you can see, were really roughly bundled up in some newspapers and in a rather poor condition. At the time, I made a few photocopies of some of the paper documents, not all that interested, but thinking I could do something with it. And as a token of my interest and concern, bought some plastic boxes in the nearby town in an attempt to contain the pest and humidity eating their way through them, which luckily, because I knew nothing about archival conservation at the time, ended up quickly being used in the kitchen instead. I told the headman that I would try to find a way or some funding to preserve his documents properly, though I realized that I had probably created an expectation which I would not find the time or money to fulfill, as I was too absorbed by the pressing need of writing up my PhD, then of securing a postdoc, raising a young child, etc. However, some 5 years later, I came across some funding, inadvertently. I came across the Endangered Archives program. So the Data Age archive began its early life in 2011 under the rather embarrassing title of RTLC, that is Rescuing Tamil Customary Law. I rarely say this. In its early infancy, it was designed as a 12-month pilot project destined to explore, through very intensive fieldwork, whether written documents of scholarly value for the study of conflict management, besides those I had observed at the Kala Headman's house, were lying around in private households of traditional or former power holders in Kalar Nadu, and whether their owners would grant us permission to digitize them. By that time, beyond its serendipitous trigger, this project was motivated by two factors. Firstly, as I started getting into the field of legal anthropology, I realized that the study of legal culture at the village level is plagued by a paucity of historical documentations and inhabited by legions of cliches, featuring on one hand banyan trees and village republics, and on the others, images of loathsome caste domination and violation of basic human rights. Secondly, slide movement, yes. Secondly, though M. Srinivas had tried as early as 1959 to beckon researchers to the existence of written documentation at the village level, his efforts went largely unheeded. And indeed, the gradual disaffection of village studies amongst anthropologists during the second half of the 20th century aggravated this situation, as next to no fresh evidence, if I may call it this way, was gathered to counter earlier misconceptions, which gradually fossilized into hard facts. When we began what was initially intended as a 12-month exploratory project, I had convinced two fellow anthropologists to join me in this archival treasure hunt. My friend and colleague Ponaresu not only stayed throughout the project that lasted over 5 years, but pursued the work even further. As I was motivated in collecting documents pertaining to social life amongst the Phamalai Kalar to feed my personal research, Ponaresu began building an archive amongst the Kongo Velala, among whom he was carrying out his PhD at the time. We both went over and much beyond our personal research interests, as we quickly realized that the window of opportunity of access we had to such documents in the villages might prove much more complicated for historians with less or no fieldwork experience. To be perfectly honest, the search began somewhat blindly, as we were trying to locate unrecorded and therefore invisible private collections. We progressed from word of mouth from one household to another, from one village to the next. It took an extraordinary amount of time, a lot of wrong turns and dead ends, also a considerable amount of doubt, patience, and sweat, and a lot of fun. As you may well imagine, you cannot simply walk into a village household and say, please let me have a look at what's inside your box, your cabinet drawer, etc., and evaluate whether your crumbling palm leaves and papers are of interest to us. I have no time to detail here how we went about building enough trust to enter households and gain the confidence of the families we work with. However, I want to point out a fact that I'm not always necessarily comfortable with, which is that at the different stages of the project within the localities or territories we carried out fieldwork in, we always worked within a network of households belonging to the same caste or subcaste, and always purposefully failed to mention that further afield, we worked among very different castes or rival castes. I strongly believe that if we had done multi-caste fieldwork in the same locality, we would have encountered much more reticence to access the documents. In most households, we were the first outsiders, i.e. non-family members, to look into the family documentation. And in many cases, such as the one described with the Kala headman, the owners were largely, if not totally unaware of the actual content and topic of the documents. During the course of the first year of the project, which was going to become Data 8, the villagers we met showed us a number of different quote unquote old documents. Though initially we were searching for documents relating to customary law, as that was my research interest at the time, families were showing us all the documents handed down by their forefathers. Very quickly, it appeared absurd and almost even rude to segregate the documents, digitizing only those relating to conflict and leaving the rest, quote unquote, outside to rot, crumble, and be burnt, because not in the ambit of my personal research interest. From the second year, if not a little earlier, we decided to include all documents encountered in family households inside the archive, though knowing perfectly well that we would never be studying them ourselves, as they cover a scope of interest much beyond the transformation and continuity of customary law amongst the Pramala Kala, which interested me, or the transformation of kinship and authority amongst the Palayakaras, which Panarasu was studying. Each time myself or Panarasu had the opportunity to present this archive of village documents nation, one of our secret agendas is to hopefully spark interest among historians and anthropologists to explore, study, appropriate the vast amount of unique documents we have gathered. We could, and maybe we should, carry on locating and digitizing inside village households, but for various, mostly professional reasons, we have put on hold the collecting. And also, it's important to note that we have yet to find a proper home for this archive to make it fully accessible and searchable. Reflecting back on how and where we started, the very personal motivations that drove us to carry out this project, we are still somewhat bewildered at the insane amount of written documentation waiting to be studied in villages in Tamil Nadu. Thank you. I think I went a little bit over time.
Thank you so much, Zoe. You can just end your screen. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Let me see if I'm visible. Okay. So our final speaker for this session is Dr. S. Irfan Habib. He is a historian of science and political history, and his work covers a wide expanse dealing with colonialism and modernity, but also specifically the dissemination of scientific knowledge through local languages, including Urdu. He was until recently, the Maulana Azad Chair at the National University of Educational Planning and Administration in New Delhi. I am also a keen follower of his YouTube channel and his work in public history. And today he will be speaking with us about his engagement with archives. Over to you.
Thank you, Priyanka. No, I've been listening to the two previous presenters, which were really very exciting. And I must admit that I haven't done that sort of elaborate archiving or preservation of documents. I have been a user of archives for decades now, from late 70s, almost mid 70s onwards. And archives has always been an exciting place for any researcher. Getting into an archives, finding a new document every day when you explore whatever you want to do is an experience which is really difficult to describe. And I can go back to my own early days when I began work on Shahid Bhagat Singh, the revolutionaries of the 1920s. That was a period when my own exposure to archives began from 1976-77 onwards, and it was actually every day a new experience when a file used to come back, when you requisition a file, you actually wait. But I'm talking of as a researcher, and I can share this excitement with so many others. I'm not alone. All researchers have that excitement every day. When you requisition a file, a group of 5 or 10 files, and you find that only 4 come out, the rest of the 6 are either brittle or not non-transferred. So this was an experience which went on for years, 2-3 years, till I finished my work. And I used to share this experience with most of the researchers in those times. Today, in historical research, particularly, archives has receded into some sort of a background, and I don't believe that importance of archives is not that not central in historical research. But there are alternative ways of looking at the past available now, new methods of looking at the past, etc., where archives doesn't really play much important role. For me, it's not true. For me, archives is actually central till now. But I'm talking of some people for whom archives actually is, they can do their books without even visiting archives anywhere in the world. Now, for me, later on, after finishing my history of my Bhagat Singh revolutionary period, I got into history of science, social history of science particularly, and here a new sort of excitement began. And I'm sorry because I'm very poor in sharing things through technology. I can use, but I can't share the way Abhishek did. I have lots of things I could have shared, like the work I did in the whole of 1980s, how modern science was communicated or taught through Urdu as one of the local languages. And this is from 1840s, 1850s onwards. Delhi College in Delhi, which is a Zakir Hussain College now, used to be Delhi College in those times, established in 1825. And after 1857, most of the stuff in the library was looted, was destroyed. And when I started my work, I just couldn't find anything of worth actually researching or reading about that particular period. In my explorations, I went to Hyderabad. And in Hyderabad, Asafia Library, State Central Library, I found, and this is a sad story as a researcher, which I have to share, and I've shared with so many other people. I found copies of a fortnightly, which I was looking forward to, called Fawaidul Nazreen. Fawaidul Nazreen was a fortnightly brought out by Master Ramchandra, who was a science teacher in Delhi College. This fortnightly used to deal with modern science, just modern science. He used to translate lots of stuff which he used to receive in English, translate it into Urdu, make it available for people who had no access to modern science in their own tongue, in their own language. So it was a remarkable job for 1840s, 1850s. And he tried to put in like lots of stuff like what is astronomy, what is a shift from geocentrism to heliocentrism, what is Newton's law, different animals of the world which were not heard of, in India. What is an ostrich? Where is ostrich found? What is railway? Railway had just come in, even in Europe in the mid 19th century. How railway works. So all these interesting things he communicated through his sketches, which he drew himself. And so all those files I tried to locate in that library. Now, how I located it, this is a sad story, and this is a job for an archivist, a job which I tried to fulfill for a few months. When I went there, the people in the library, the Asafia library, told me that these files we used to have, but actually they are lying somewhere upstairs, which have been weeded out. Lots of stuff has been weeded out, and that is lying upstairs at the top of the library building. I said, but how can you weed out something so important? And they said, no, we can't find it because the place is full of pigeons. And so it's very difficult to reach and there is no access. Finally, when I insisted for 2 days, they gave me access. They said, okay, you want to go yourself? You can go. We can provide you a ladder, which they did. I spent the whole day, found 8 files from 1842 to 1851. And when I brought those files down, the library administrator became owners of those files. I said, I want to take them home because you have already thrown them away. But they obviously didn't allow me to take them. Finally, I got them photocopied, the old type of machine, which the modern machines didn't exist in 1984, 85. Finally, I brought lots of files with me, which are with me, and I use them in my work. After 3 years, when I went back, and this is the sad part, I went back to the library, despite all assurances they gave me, I couldn't find those files again. There was no index, there were no files, nothing. All that disappeared. I filed a written complaint in 2 pages and nothing worked. So this is something sad, which has happened to our languages, to a language like Urdu, because the users have declined, number of users are not there, numbers of readers, researchers are not there, people don't care. So, but fortunately, I have my own collection, which I have kept with me, which I have been using all these years. And finally, I will give it to a library like Teen Murti, which can be used later on by people. So this will be my own contribution later on. Lately, now, I went back to Bhagat Singh after 28 years of history of science because I forgot about him. I was doing something else. Went to Lahore for a conference. Decided to go into the Lahore archives, and this was another experience. When I would go there, and I went there to look into papers of Bhagat Singh, his letters, which are not accessible here in Delhi, in India. Somehow, I found quite a few interesting stuff in 2-3 days. Brought them here. In Delhi government has set up a Bhagat Singh archives, of which I am an advisory board member, and I'm trying to put that archives together. So whatever collection we could have, now that archives is available for researchers in Delhi. Lots of stuff which I brought, which Professor Chaman Lal got, lots of other people got, all that has been put together. And we have a Bhagat Singh archives now, which researchers can go in and use. This is something which I have tried to do recently in the past 3-4 years. So these are a few things which, not only as a researcher, but as someone who helped a bit to put together stuff which can be used by future researchers. So Mala, this is my own, in brief, experience with archives, both as a researcher and as well as someone who put together a little material which could have been, one was surely on the verge of being lost because it was almost lost had I not got those things photocopied. So I feel sad because as a researcher, I don't know how many such documents are lying or being destroyed all over India, because we hardly, because I think I have one more experience to share. In Hyderabad, there used to be one Abdul Samad Khan, who was a private collector. Now he was basically a dealer in motor cars, and when I was working in the library, in this museum library, Salarjung Museum Library, so somebody told me that there is a Urdu Research Center just a few minutes away from here. I said, okay, this is 1986. So during my break, I just walked to that place, and I found one old man lying on a little bed, and he didn't show much interest in this thing. He was not very sure whether I'm really serious. And he said, okay, can you please come tomorrow? I went back to him, and then he realized that maybe I was a bit more serious than what he thought about me. then I spent the whole day with him. So his collection, you cannot imagine, there were 3 halls full of books in Persian and Urdu, more than 500 travelogues in Urdu, written over 300 years, large number of books on science. Many of them I got photocopied, many translations of the 19th century on astronomy, on trigonometry, on geometry. All that I got some of them photocopied. Now that collection, this man, he said, I'm asthmatic and I have no resources to continue with this collection. Can you help me? Because I developed some friendship with him. Can you help me to put this collection together?
Sorry, so we'll have to open the session to questions.
Okay, sure. I'll just finish in 1 minute.
Just.
So finally, that collection was given to one P. Sundaraya Center in Hyderabad, and that still is being documented even now. Lots of stuff in Persian and Urdu. They could not find people to actually catalog them. So I went there to that center again 3 years ago. That collection is still lying unpacked. I don't know what will happen to it, but this is the fate of large number of documents in our country in different languages. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we'll now open the floor to questions. Let me just read the first question. This is for Abhishek from Ananya Deka, who asks, what about the legalities or copyright after the publication is freely accessible? She's talking about Deshabrati. Maybe you can answer that. Are there any copyright issues around this?
Thank you. I switched networks, but in case you still have trouble hearing me, just let me know. I'll see the texts. I think the larger, the documents I have been part of digitizing are all coming from movements which are radical in some sense. And they have not been that concerned about copyright. So they have been more concerned about their material, someone gaining proprietary rights over their material and then hiding it in some kind of paywalled access. So the agreements that they signed, people who were part of the process were the ones who gave authorization. And the agreement stipulated that we are giving permission to digitize on the condition that this will be made available for free access online without any geographical or time, etc. Restraints. So it was a copyleft. I'm forgetting the exact license number that was used. So in that sense, I haven't had any copyright issues as such. Just it's coming from a different perspective, and the concern has been different.
Okay. Our next question is, wait, let me look at this. For Zoe, and it goes back to the first session where we talked about community archives. Once digitized, how will these varied sets connect to each other? Sometimes digitized materials cannot provide us with the context. For instance, missing pages and materiality is important. This is not to undermine the fantastic effort, rather to think of how digitizing can also help the community in preservation of this knowledge.
Thank you. It's a very important question. I mentioned right at the end of the presentation that we have yet to host properly this archive. Part of it, a large part of it is available. Can you hear me?
Yes, Priyanka, Zoe, both of you are audible actually.
Oh, okay. No, yeah. How to connect these individual collections, which were digitized, namely in 2 traditional territories, Kalar Nadu and Kongo Nadu. That's a problem we have with the way the archive is presently available. That's within the framework of the British Library, which hasn't allowed us to create a proper searchable database to connect one collection to the other. As I mentioned, we did an incredible amount of field work with the families. So what is so far available are the digitized documents. What we want to make available in the long term is also all the interviews that went into who wrote the document, who saw the document. I mean, any information we could collect from the living owners of the documents as to how it can build knowledge, awareness for the community. That's a very delicate question, and one that Ponares and I worry a bit about, because you can characterize data age in different ways. You can say it's a archive of village documents, but you can also, because of my personal research interests and Ponares's personal research interests, you could describe them as caste archives, with all the problems that could go along with making available private documents relating to specific castes in localities where there's, strong tension and violence, intercaste violence. So we're progressing very slowly as to how to make the best use of this, how to make this archive available in the best and most complete way for researchers, whilst also being very careful and conscientious of the families among whom we digitize these documents, which could be used probably in certain circumstances outside of pure historical or anthropological research.
Great. Before we move on to the next question, and also just because we rushed into the Q&A, I just wanted to also thank Irfan Habib for sharing his personal journey through the world of archives. It also dawned on me that often these collections don't become explored until a researcher suddenly expresses that interest and passion for that subject and for those collections. So thank you so much,
Thank you.
Dr. Habib.
Thank you.
So the next question is regarding Indigenous and here Dalit material archived. I think this could be for both Abhishek and Zoe. How should we as researchers think about ethical responsibilities towards safeguarding? This has already been answered, I think, but towards safeguarding community histories that anyways are oppressed and marginalized. How would researchers approach this?
If I can just add. Is it okay? If I can just add, I would say that perhaps for me the most important thing has been listening to the people involved and see what they would like to happen. And so because I was working with the people who were part of the Naluppu project, and Hyderabad Book Trust were their publishers, and they were the one who digitized it. They did not have the resources, so this was giving them funding support to do it. So it was supporting a local initiative and also sharing access through a portal which anyone can read. And also that produced consequences afterwards, in the sense that this material had been lying in a godown for all these many years, right? But now that it came out and it got digitized, Hyderabad Book Trust then published a couple of books out of this process. So for example, they published 2 volumes of Bhattacharyya's editorials and things like that. So it also had kind of knock-on effects in that. So I think overall for me, it's been important to listen to what they would like to happen with this material while saying that, okay, this is a possibility that I could work here.
To answer the question sideways, to not answer the question, but respond sideways, one of the silences we have, but we had to have for fieldwork reasons in the archive, but it was pretty much the same when I was carrying out and when I carried out subsequent fieldwork amongst the Pramalai Kala, which you can kind of characterize as a lower dominant caste, for however good that label is that, and I mentioned it briefly in the presentation, it was simply not possible in specific villages. Either you worked with the Pramalai Kalas or you worked with the Dalits or other communities, but working with 2-3 communities was simply impossible, because then each and every door would shut. Given the fact that I had been working in Kalamnadu previously with the Pramalai Kalas, I did attempt, and we did a little bit in the Data H archive, approach Dalit families for documentations. But I mean, these are, for all of those of you familiar with South Central Tamil Nadu, these are small villages, and working with Kalars who then know that we go into Dalit households for the same purpose is just putting those Dalit families in danger. I mean, literally. So we, ideally, we would have, worked every household in a single village, but for the purpose of, the selfish purpose of guaranteeing our access into households, but also that of not endangering families and Dalit families, we limited ourselves to one subcaste, maybe two maximum, very close subcaste in a very same locality. So.
Okay. Another question for Dr. Headley. And I guess this could also apply to Abhishek's project, but have the Data Age archives been used by researchers, community organizations, and members? Would like to understand the kinds of interest they have generated or work that they've been used for.
So far, no. So far, the archive has generated interest among researchers. There was a lot of, and Ponaris would be the one answering much better than me, and I know he's somewhere behind a dark screen. So far, no. There are a lot amongst the Pamalai Kalas, there are a lot of local historians. Local history will, until the 1980s, took the shape of published books, then of cassette recordings of various genres, historical genres, expounding on Pamalai Kala history. Now there are DVDs and so forth. I'm not sure that from the documents we digitized, further histories were produced locally. What it did produce locally is an awareness of the importance of the documents, because we would not only come in and digitize inside the household with the families, but then we would clean the documents, clean the palm leaves, preserve the paper documents in acid-free paper, organize them, give advice as to where to store them in the household. And so at least at the level of the locality or their family, that raised interest and awareness as family members or other people would sit around all day and say, oh, now what is this document about? Oh, that's of interest. So that may then go on to generate interest from local historians, but as far as I know, for the moment, it hasn't been the case. But it has, and I hope, really generated interest within families on preserving these documents, not burning them. In many cases, we would come, I mean, it happened a lot. Oh, yes, we had a bunch of palm leaves, this and that, but it was taking up room, so we burnt them last year, et cetera, et cetera. So our minor contribution has been to help the families think about conserving these documents. The Madurai District Library records did send out an appeal a couple of years before we started working, saying, if you have any family archives, please deposit them. We have the means of conserving them and all that. And it was nil. No family, wanted to give up records for which they don't know the content, but it's a family heirloom. It's a testimony to their past, even if they're not reading the content. So they don't want to, they prefer burn them than separate from them.
In my context, I found that it's where there is a strong movement continuing that it's found most use locally. So for the Telugu speaking regions, both for the left related digitizing I did and for the Dalit organizing that I worked with Naluppu. So those have been taken up and it has been shared and is being talked about in those spheres. But let's say the Uttar Pradesh things that I published since the movement there has weakened subsequently, I am not aware of any local pick up on it in Banaras itself, for instance. But that document being in Hindi has been picked up, at least by left networks in different parts of the country. Like, let's say, Sanhati published an article on it and things like that. So I imagine once Deshobrati goes online, it's digitized, but it's still being cataloged. There may be some conversation about it in the Calcutta context. But again, I have found that it's really the movement which generates interest.
That's interesting. We have one question for Irfan Habib. This is from Anubha, who asks, the problem of archivists and librarians judging interested folks as not serious enough, unfortunately continues to plague government archives, and the NMML is no exception. This is just a humble suggestion regarding your idea of passing on your personal archive to a library. Would a not-for-profit, community-oriented archive not be a better idea in today's environment? I suggest this, keeping in mind that NMML gatekeeps access to researchers without university credentials and the common public. Also, the uncertainty of what is happening to the NAI Annex archives.
Yeah. Well, that is, no, this is a extremely serious problem, and this is a very India-related problem, because I don't think you find something like this anywhere else in the world. It is only in India that you feel so uncertain about documentation, about anything you share with an institution, whether that will stay safe or not. One is not sure. So that I perfectly agree. But the point is, for people like us, I don't have a huge collection. I have quite a few things with me, but there are people who have huge repositories lying with them. And I have tried, like, recently, and let me share another example, and this will maybe the answer to the question as well. Like, I'm working on Maulana Abul Kalam Azad these days. My book is about to be over. There is a family in Calcutta, his wife's family, who have more than 100 letters written by him, which have not been accessible till now to researchers. I got in touch with the family. For the last 3-4 years, I've been in touch with them. They have assured me that they will share those papers. I told them, when I was actually Maulana Azad chair in the university, that we have begun the digitization of documents on education. Can you please hand over those letters to us? We will digitize them, give you back the original copy, give you back the digitized version also, and keep one for our own repository. And we will provide guest house for you to come and stay. Even on these conditions, they refuse to agree. The point is, we are so possessive about things which will serve no purpose to us as individuals. Because if you keep that stuff away from the excess of researchers in future, then you are actually serving no purpose. Now, for me, like people like me, if you give it to some institution, I don't think in Delhi particularly, you have, I have lots of problems with NMML the last few years, though it has been my second home. I've done most of my work there, like so many others. National Archives is under threat, as pointed out by the questioner, and we are all concerned about it. We have been speaking about it. We have written letters about it. Annex is being raised, and Annex building contains most of the collections. How those papers will be put in safe custody, where they will be inaccessible to researchers for quite some time, whether they will come back safely to the place or not, so one is not sure. So all these questions come to mind, not only into the mind of the questioner, but people like me and so many others. But where are the answers? The point is, what is the answer? You have to find some institution. And I don't know anybody else has, like, there are some private trusts which are coming forward, and maybe they are better places to preserve, but I'm not still sure. One has to go back to NAI, to NNML. There is no option.
Thank you. There's one more question regarding technical metadata. So this is a query for all the panelists. Whenever a digitization project is taken up, how major is the need to compute technical metadata? Are you considering it on your respective project level? We 1 second. A final question that maybe we can also look at at the same time, if that's easier to address. In the previous panel, which was on the present farmers movement in Delhi, one of the panelists commented that one should move beyond or transcend the class. I am bringing in caste here too. This comment probably stems from concern for the universal, which tends to see identity-based movements as. How do we see that in the light of the question raised by Ali Akbar Mehta and Zoe and Abhishek's responses to this question? Maybe we can also address those questions later on. We can send them to the panelists and they can take their time over them. Are there any other questions? I don't think anybody raised their hand.
Yeah, on metadata, I just wanted to say that I personally haven't had to do that because that the South Asia Microfilm Project, their team does that work. But yeah, of course, it is very important. Like Professor Habib was saying, and I worked in those same archives in Hyderabad as well. The state of indexing or cataloging is just a mess. And like, for example, even in Calcutta, there is only one personal library which has little magazines, and that has no catalog. So it's just entirely this man who's been running it from the 80s and his memory of where to find things. So yeah. And then for the second question, I'm sorry, I don't exactly follow. I came late for the previous panel, so I'm not sure what it refers to and what question it refers to.
Yeah, perhaps if Natasha is here, she could elaborate on it. Are you here? We have 3 more minutes, so we can address it but I think she may not be here.
She's here.
She's here. Okay, let's ask to unmute. Can you unmute?
Yeah, you know what? Hi, this is Dr. Natasha Thogam, and I'm from IIT Jodhpur. I'm an assistant professor there. And my concern was that, I don't know, I mean, correct me if I've wrongly heard it, but it was probably in the context of you know, they were talking about how, you know, in the previous panel, you know, there was a particular comment. I've forgotten who was the panelist or the speaker, but the person was talking about, you know, that one should move beyond these, you know, especially in the context of this farmers movement. One should move beyond the class. And for me, I felt it was you know, hinting at a certain kind of a critique of you know, the identity movement, and yeah, I do not. And then so I thought, you know, while there was this discussion about you know, the concern of, you know, ethicality, which was raised by Mr. Dr. Ali, this person Ali Akbar. I thought that, you know, how would you know, these two kind of you know, take would, you know, sort of had a conversation with one another, because on the one hand, at least from Joyce and Abhishek's responses, I believe that at least from them, they have a certain kind of, you know, they see a certain kind of responsibility of the archive towards representation of community as such. So on the one hand, you have that kind of, you know, sense of responsibility towards the archive, but on the other hand, again, there is also this universalist concern of moving beyond these, you know, what I mean, what I thought of would have understood from that previous comment. So I thought I would, you know, like to open this up for a discussion here.
Thank you so much for your question. Unfortunately, we've already reached the end of our time for this session. So maybe I can, if the panelists can put their email addresses in the chat, then you could also write to them to ask your question and carry this conversation forward through email. So we'll wrap up the session. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing their work. It was really wonderful to hear each of you speak about your engagement with archives and your extensive work digitizing collections. Our next session will be a conservation workshop by S. Giri Kumar, who is a leading art conservator. And he will be talking about sustainable ways in which people can record and preserve their home collections. And so that will begin at 7:15. So do stick around for that if you can. And so we'll just be taking a 15-minute break while we do some technical preparation for that session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Priyanka.
And,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.